It says, and it came to pass in those days that he went out into a mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. Well, I want to stop there because this is Jesus, the Son of God. And what is he doing? He's starting his day off in prayer. He's got a task to do. He wants to be led by the Father. How many times have we go through our situations or our troubles and we try to work it out on our own? Now here's Jesus, the Son of God, but does he tell Dad, I got this? No. He prays to him. Every morning. He started his days out with prayer. But today was something a little bit more special. He woke up a little extra early, prayed all night because he had a task to do. He was commissioned to 12. It was a big decision. He wanted to know the Father's response. He wanted to have the guidance of God to give him the ability to pick the 12 that he was going to commission to go with him. Because it was a big decision. In verse 13 it says, and when it was day, he called unto him his disciples, and of them he chose 12, whom also he named apostles. Now, a disciple was anybody who believed and just followed him. Followed Jesus, followed John the Baptist. John the Baptist had disciples. Actually, one of Jesus' 12, one of his 12, Andrew, was John the Baptist's apostle or disciple. But when he saw Jesus, he knew that's the one I need to start following. So a disciple is anybody who followed or believed on a person like John the Baptist. So Jesus had a lot of disciples following him. But now he was picking the 12 apostles. Now, an apostle is a delegate or ambassador. Mm-hmm. So, in the sense, Jesus was picking the 12 that was going to be able to spread what he was going to teach him in the next 3.5 years. He was going to teach him everything that he could and prepare them to go out and be ambassadors to the church. They were going to build the church what we have today. And that was a big decision. They say, if you read the Bible scholars and stuff, that there was just not just a few. There was many disciples that was following Jesus. But he was going to pick 12. Even if you go into Mark said he called them up one by one on the mountain. Now, can you imagine all these men standing around in the morning knowing Jesus has been out all night praying, knowing it's probably something a little bit more, this is a different morning. Usually he gets up a little early and prays, but now he's been up all night. Something's going to happen. Why is the master praying all night? Then he starts calling them up one by one. Things were starting to happen. The ministry was starting to happen. The church was starting to happen. It says Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James, and John, Philip, and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called Zealotus, and Judas the brother of James, and Judas Iscariot, which also was the traitor. These were the 12 men that Jesus handpicked. Peter, sometimes named called Cephas, means the stone or the rock. If you study each apostle, they all had their characteristics. They all had their shortcomings. They all had their strong suits. Peter was the rock, but Peter had his defaults. And you had Andrew and Peter. They were brothers, and which I told you before, Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist, and James and John were fishermen, and they had short tempers and they made harsh judgments. That was their traits. That was how they thought. And Philip from Bethesda, as Peter and Andrew found by Jesus and asked to follow me. Nathanael or Bartholomew was told by Philip that he found the Messiah. Then we talked about Matthew in last week, and Thomas was the apostle, best known as Doubting Thomas. And then James was Matthew's brother, and Simon, known for his zeal of God. And then we have Judas Iscariot. So they all had their characteristics. They all come from, say, fishermen. Some was tax collectors. And you had a melting pot of men. And it just goes to show you that no matter where you come from, who you are, whether you be a doctor, a lawyer, a garbage collector, or whatever trait that you have, or whatever rich or poor, whatever what part of the country you come from, God needs you. That there's no respect of person. That no matter what, God has a need for you. And you had these 12, and he assembled these 12. And these 12 all had their different traits, but these 12, Jesus prayed and could see how they were going to be used to spread the gospel. Because they were going to go throughout the modernized world and tell what Jesus and who he was after the fact he was crucified. He knew, but they didn't. But he handpicked them himself. Even handpicked his. And when you read the scriptures, and every time one of the disciples speaks about Judas, they always put in there the one who betrayed him. But Jesus knew that. Jesus still picked him. Yep. It says, and it came down with them and stood in the plain and the company of his disciples and a great multitude of people out of all Judea and Jerusalem and from the sea coast of Tyre and Sidon, which came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And they that were vexed with unclean spirits, and they were healed. So when he came off this mountain with the 12, here's a lot of people from a lot of different areas. It spanned a great area. And when we've talked before in the past, when Jesus looked at them and said, "Follow me." Well, when Jesus started healing, it probably shot like wildfire because this was different. When Jesus started preaching, it was an authoritative preach because he is the only one that could preach authoritative because he was the Son of God. And the way he spoke probably didn't sound like no other because it was in the I. It was me instead of he is coming. It says, I have came. It was an authoritative lesson. And people grasped onto it. They knew who he was. Because they had been waiting, as I taught before, they've been waiting for 400 years for somebody to come and deliver them. And some of the other disciples would go to their brothers and sisters and say, I found the Messiah. I found the one that Abraham has said. And all this time, it doesn't take much, especially when he started healing. Because I don't care what it is. there was probably a lot of people who came to see Jesus, but then after a while, there was a lot of people that came just to get healed. Jesus was just the icing on the cake. But a lot of people came for their own self-needs. They wasn't coming from their own salvation, because at that time, some people believed that he was probably Jesus, the Messiah. But as word started spreading around, somebody says, there's this man. Probably didn't even know his name. There's a man that healed so-and-so. And they said, you're kidding. And they said, where's he at? Well, he's traveling through here. And they would probably pilgrim, because the Bible told us these are people from different areas. And when he came off that mountain, there was a multitude of people. A large group of people. But what made those 12 special is when all these disciples would follow him, but for these 12, he specifically said, follow me. How that was a verbal invitation. All these other people just would come and would find Jesus and listen to him preach and follow him. And follow him around wherever he went, would listen to his teachings and listen to see his miracles. But these 12 had a personal invitation. It's different. You can go to a party. I mean, you can go to a party because somebody else invited you. It wasn't the person who was having the party. You was going with a friend. Say, come on, go with me to so-and-so's house. They're having a party. Well, you think, it don't matter. Come on. And you show up, and it doesn't matter. No. But Jesus asked them, the 12 personally, follow me. And that's what made those 12 was more special than anybody, because they were asked. Because Jesus saw something in them. And then when he came down and he started healing people, and they specifically said that he healed their diseases and that they were vexed with unclean spirits and they were healed. Not only was he healing diseases of what we all have, but he was healing spiritually. He was doing something that no man could do. He was casting out demons and healing them that was spiritual. That he couldn't sit there. At that time they had their doctors. If you had something, you could have remedies for it. But maybe some diseases was far-fetched that was above them, and they didn't have the cure for it. But he was healing that, plus he was healing you spiritually. With doctors had no rhyme or reason why you was possessed. They just know that you was possessed and couldn't heal you. But he was healing both body and soul. And it says, the whole multitude sought to touch him, for there went virtue out of him, and healed them all. Now we've read about another time that virtue left his body, and it was when the woman was pressing through the crowd. And what did she want? She said, I just want to touch the hem of his garment. Now why would she think that? Now, you're thinking, but her faith was so strong that she said, if I just touch the hem. Here we saw right now that when Jesus, I believe wholeheartedly that Jesus, that they just had to touch him. That these crowds were so large, I don't believe that he just gathered them up, put them in a line, and then sit there and tell them what's wrong with them, and say, look, hey, this is what's wrong with me, Jesus, I'm doing this. He said, touch and heal it. I believe when he would walk through, he would talk and he would preach, and the anointing would come on him. God's love and grace would shine upon him. And the only thing they had to do was just touch him, because they knew he was the Son of God, and they were healed. And it probably spread like wildfire. Like, only thing I'd done was touch him. That woman heard that. She was, wherever she lived at, they said, only thing you had to do was touch him, and you were healed. And she was pressing through that crowd, and she was thinking, if I can just get to the hem of his garment and touch it. And what happened when she touched it? He said virtue left his body. And he knew, because they had faith. When these people, when he came into these multitude of crowds, he knew, because they had faith. They knew who he was and what he could do, and they just had to touch him and was made whole. That's the power of our Jesus. He still has that power today. Whatever infirmities we have, whatever sicknesses we have, whatever how our heart is broken, he still can touch you.
That's right.
He does not change. He's not a God from afar. He's right here standing right with us. He always will be, and only thing we do is got to have the faith enough to ask him. These people saw him. And I couldn't imagine just people just touching him. He probably did glow. I couldn't imagine. It's hard to imagine. But I'm telling you, he's the same yesterday, today, and he'll be the same tomorrow. We'll have sicknesses yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Whether we give it to him, it's up to us. We're going to have our bad times, and we're going to have our good times. He's the God of the good, as just as he is when he's the God in the bad times. But we just got to have the faith to give it to him. We got to put our whole heart into him. That's what he wants.